The air in the conference room was thick with tension. The walls, lined with sleek glass panels, seemed to close in on me as I stepped inside. A long, polished mahogany table stretched between me and Lucas Grant, the man who had been at Harper Lane for less than 6 months, but was already wielding his power like a blade. He sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, a crisp navy suit hugging his frame, a man completely at ease with what he was about to do. I had no idea that in the next few seconds, my world would shatter. Elena, Lucas began, his voice smooth, calculated. We've decided to restructure the client relations department. Something in his tone sent a chill up my spine. I folded my arms, bracing myself. What does that mean? His lips barely moved. It means today will be your last day. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to process what I just heard. My chest tightened. A strange mix of disbelief and rage bubbling inside me. 20 years, 2 decades of loyalty, of sacrifice, of building this firm from the ground up alongside Michael Harper, the man who had once promised me a future here. And this was how it ended? I don't understand. My voice was eerily calm, though my heart pounded against my ribs. I've given everything to this company, my time, my energy. Lucas barely blinked as he pushed a navy folder across the table. The Harper and Lane logo was embossed in silver on the cover. I already knew what was inside. Severance, a cold corporate apology wrapped in legal jargon. Business decisions aren't personal. His words were clipped, indifferent, as if that was supposed to soften the betrayal. I clenched my jaw. That's exactly what people say when they're making it personal. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Lucas's face. Annoyance? Guilt? I wasn't sure, and I didn't care. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The men and women sitting around the table, people I had worked with for years, kept their eyes down, avoiding my gaze. Not one of them spoke up. Cowards. Security arrived minutes later, 2 men in black suits standing by the door like I was some criminal being escorted out. The humiliation burned deep, but I refused to let them see me break. With measured steps, I walked back to my office for the last time. The moment I stepped inside, memories hit me like a tidal wave. The framed photo of my team on the bookshelf, the stack of thank you notes from clients over the years, the crystal paperweight Michael Harper had gifted me on my 15th anniversary. I traced my fingers over it, my hands trembling. This place had been my second home. Now, I was being erased like I had never mattered. I forced myself to keep moving, gathering my belongings with deliberate precision. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The whispers outside my office grew louder, but I ignored them, keeping my head high. Then just as I was about to step into the elevator, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Sophia Bennett, the CEO of Bennett Tech, my biggest client. The message was brief, but it sent a jolt through my system. Elena, I've heard rumors. Call me ASAP. I hesitated, staring at the text. Something was shifting, something bigger than just my dismissal. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The days after my termination felt like a strange, weightless limbo. One moment, I had a purpose, a routine, a title, a place in the world. The next, I was adrift. The shock of betrayal clung to me, a dull ache in my chest that refused to fade. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. On my second morning of unemployment, I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept in. The sun was already streaming through my apartment windows when I finally forced myself out of bed. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. My LinkedIn profile was still set to Senior Director of Client Relations, Harper Lane. With a deep breath, I edited my headline. Former Harper Lane executive seeking new opportunities. I barely had time to process the change before the notifications started. My profile exploded with views, hundreds of them. Then the messages started rolling in. Sophia Bennett was the first. Call me now. David Marshall from Archer Pharmaceuticals followed. Elena, what the hell is going on? Let's talk. Claire Montgomery from Summit Financial, I just heard. Are you okay? Also, what's your next move? The sheer volume of responses was overwhelming. These weren't just professional acquaintances, they were people I had spent years building relationships with. And they weren't reaching out to Harper Lane, they were reaching out to me. I hesitated, staring at my phone. Should I call Sophia? Should I even get involved? But the truth was, I had no choice. I dialed Sophia's number. She picked up before the first ring finished. Elena, her voice was sharp, demanding, tell me it's not true. I exhaled. It's true. Silence, then a curse. What the hell is Harper Lane thinking? You've been the backbone of client relations for years. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Apparently, Lucas Grant doesn't think so. Sophia made a disgusted sound. That man is an idiot. Then, more softly, I need to be honest with you. The second I heard, I started reconsidering my contract. A pang of guilt shot through me. Sophia, you don't have to do that, she scoffed. Of course I do. My loyalty was never to Harper Lane. It was to you, and I'm not the only one. Her words sent a strange warmth through me, gratitude maybe, or the first glimmer of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Look, she continued, I don't know what your next move is, but whatever it is, I'm interested. I hesitated. I don't even know what I'm doing yet. Figure it out. Sophia's voice was firm. And when you do, call me first. By the time I hung up, my heart was racing. One client pulling out wouldn't mean much to Harper Lane, but what if it wasn't just one? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Over the next few days, I fielded call after call. David, Claire, and half a dozen others echoed the same sentiment. If I wasn't at Harper Lane, they weren't sure if they wanted to be either. And in the heart of their frustration, I felt something else brewing, something I hadn't expected. Vindication. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't orchestrated any of it. But Lucas Grant had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the power of relationships. And now he was paying the price. A week had passed since my termination, yet the sting of betrayal still clung to me like a second skin. Despite the chaos of client calls and messages, there was still a hollow part of me that couldn't shake the weight of 20 years at Harper Lane. I had built something there, something real. And in a single meeting, Lucas Grant had torn it away. But the world wasn't waiting for me to wallow. On a cold Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. Elena Hayes. My voice was steady, but exhaustion lined its edges. Elena, this is Daniel Carter. The name alone made me sit up. Daniel Carter wasn't just a headhunter. He was the headhunter. The kind of man who moved executives around the industry like pieces on a chessboard. If he was calling, it wasn't for small talk. I heard what happened at Harper Lane, he continued. You've got half the industry buzzing. Some firms want to meet with you. I hesitated. I'm not looking to jump into anything just yet. Daniel chuckled. You might want to reconsider. They're not just interested in your expertise. They want you. And they want your clients. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my apartment window. It was one thing to have clients reaching out. It was another to have firms vying for me. Meet me for coffee, Daniel pressed. No pressure. Just hear me out. I hesitated for only a moment before answering. Fine. Where? The cafe was small but upscale, nestled in a quiet corner of downtown. When I arrived, Daniel was already waiting, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He stood as I approached, extending a hand. Elena, he greeted me with a knowing smile. You look like someone who's had an interesting week. I smirked, despite myself. That's one way to put it. We took our seats, and he wasted no time getting to the point. I won't sugarcoat it. Your departure has rattled the industry. People are watching, waiting to see what your next move will be. And I have a firm that's very interested in bringing you on board. I folded my arms. Which firm? Crestwood Consulting. The name gave me pause. Unlike the corporate giant that was Harper Lane, Crestwood was a boutique firm, known for prioritizing relationships over sheer profit. Their reputation was solid. Their leadership respected. What are they offering? I asked cautiously. Daniel's smile widened. Equity. A partnership, autonomy to rebuild a client relations department your way. I inhaled sharply. That wasn't just a job offer, it was power. A chance to build something from the ground up without bureaucracy suffocating me. But even as excitement stirred in my chest, doubt lingered in the back of my mind. I spent 20 years at Harper Lane, I admitted. It wasn't just a job, it was a legacy. Part of me still feels tied to it. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. I get it, but let me ask you this. Does Harper Lane feel tied to you? The question hit me harder than I expected. Number. They had let me go without hesitation. They hadn't fought for me. They had treated me like I was disposable. I looked down at my untouched coffee, my fingers tightening around the cup. I had spent 2 decades building something for someone else. Maybe it was time to build something for myself. I exhaled slowly, then met Daniel's gaze. Tell Crestwood. I paused, feeling the weight of my decision. I'm interested. The first client departure had been a tremor. Now, it was an earthquake. Every day, my phone buzzed with new calls, new messages, clients demanding answers, expressing their frustration, and more often than not, hinting at an impending departure from Harper Lane. It wasn't just Sophia Bennett. It was David Marshall, Claire Montgomery. It was executives, CFOs, CEOs, people I had worked with for years. They weren't just questioning Harper Lane's leadership. They were questioning their loyalty to a firm that had discarded me so easily, and the cracks were beginning to show. The breaking point. The first official notice came from Bennett Tech. I was sipping my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. A short text from Sophia. It's done. Sending termination notice today. My breath caught in my throat. Done? I barely had time to process before my email pinged. Attached was a forwarded document, an official termination letter from Bennett Tech to Harper Lane citing instability in client management. Sophia wasn't just considering it, she had pulled the plug, and that was just the beginning. 2 hours later, David Marshall called. I just had a meeting with Lucas Grant, he said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. I asked him how he planned to handle Archer Pharmaceuticals' account now that you're gone. And? I asked. David let out a bitter laugh. He had no answer, Elena. No transition plan, no strategy, just a lot of corporate jargon about new directions. Do you know what I told him? I stayed silent, waiting. I told him to shove his new direction and that I'd be taking my business elsewhere. A shaky exhale left my lips. David, no, Elena, he cut me off. This isn't about you or Harper Lane or even me. This is about loyalty. I've worked with you for over a decade. I trust you. Lucas Grant, He's just another arrogant suit who thinks numbers are more important than relationships. Another client? Gone. Another piece of Harper and Lane crumbling before my eyes. Lucas Grant's downfall. I imagined the chaos inside Harper and Lane. Lucas Grant sitting in his glass-walled office, watching the firm unravel around him. His mistake had been simple, yet catastrophic. He had treated clients like numbers. I had never done, and now, one by one, they were walking away. So by the end of the week, 5 major accounts had either terminated their contracts or initiated a review process. The board was in a frenzy. Employees were whispering in hallways, their faith in leadership faltering. And Lucas? He was scrambling. I received a message from an old colleague still at Harper and Lane. He's panicking, Elena. The board is furious. They want answers. I should have felt triumphant. I should have reveled in the justice of it all. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something more complicated. A deep sadness for the firm I had once loved, the place I had poured 2 decades of my life into. It wasn't just falling apart. It was rotting from the inside out. The turning point. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at my phone, my mind torn between emotions. Sadness for what Harper and Lane had been, anger for what they had done to me, and a quiet, growing determination for what came next. Because one thing was clear now. Harper and Lane wasn't my past, it was my competition, and I was just getting started. The phone rang late in the evening, long after I had settled into the quiet of my apartment. I glanced at the screen, my chest tightening at the name that appeared. Michael Harper. I hesitated. The man who had once been my mentor. The man who had married Harper and Lane from the ground up. The man who had let it all slip through his fingers. With a deep breath, I answered. Elena. Michael's voice was rough, weary. I just heard what happened. I closed my eyes for a moment. Heard? He was the founding partner. How had he only just heard? This wasn't my decision, he continued, as if reading my thoughts. Can we meet? A part of me wanted to say no, to tell him he was too late, that I had no reason to entertain anything he had to say, but another part of me, one shaped by 20 years of loyalty to that firm, needed answers. I exhaled slowly. Where? A meeting with the past. The restaurant was one of those old-world places where the lighting was dim and the air smelled of expensive whiskey and polished leather. A place Michael Harper had always favored for business meetings. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately at a corner table. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. His normally sharp suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened just enough to reveal his exhaustion. For a man who once exuded absolute control, he looked defeated. Elena, he said, standing as I approached, thank you for coming. I took my seat across from him, folding my hands on the table. I wasn't sure I would. Michael nodded as if he understood the weight behind those words. He didn't waste time with small talk. I want to make this right, he said, his voice low, urgent. Come back. We'll give you a partnership, more control. Help me fix this. I stared at him, my heart thudding in my chest. A partnership? Control. The very things I had spent years working toward, only to be tossed aside when Lucas Grant took over. But the words didn't hit the way they once would have. Instead, all I could think about was the moment I'd sat in that cold, sterile conference room. Lucas's empty words hanging in the air. Today will be your last day. You let them fire me, Michael, I said, my voice steady but sharp, like I was nothing after everything I gave to that firm. Michael's jaw tightened. I didn't know, Elena, not until after it happened. Lucas, he had the board's support. He moved fast. I scoffed. So you were powerless? Silence. I shook my head. You built Harper and Lane, Michael. Don't tell me you had no say in what happened. He sighed. rubbing a hand over his face. I let my guard down. I thought I was securing the firm's future by bringing in new leadership. I never imagined he'd be arrogant enough to push out someone like you. He exhaled sharply. And now? The clients are walking. The board is panicking. I should have fought harder for you, Elena. His admission should have meant something. But all I felt was the weight of too many years spent in a place that never truly valued me the way I had valued it. I leaned forward. You want me back because you realize what I was worth after you lost me. Michael held my gaze. I want you back because you were the best thing that ever happened to Harper and Lane. The words stirred something in me, but they weren't enough. I had already lost too much to blind faith. I had already learned my lesson. I pushed my chair back slowly, standing. I needed to hear that, Michael. I really did. I paused. But I'm not coming back. Michael's expression faltered. Elena, I spent 20 years proving my worth to Harper and Lane, I said quietly. I won't spend another second proving it again. He sat back, his shoulders sagging as if he had just realized the full extent of his mistake. I turned, leaving him at that dimly lit table. The echoes of the past fading with every step I took. I wasn't looking back, I was looking forward. The days after my meeting with Michael Harper felt like a relentless tug of war inside my mind. I had spent 2 decades at Harper and Lane, shaping its foundation, forging client relationships that had turned the firm into a powerhouse. Walking away completely felt like severing a part of myself. But then I would remember the sterile conference room, Lucas Grant's detached voice, the severance package sliding across the table like a final insult. Harper and Lane hadn't just let me go, they had discarded me. Yet Michael's words lingered. You were the best thing that ever happened to Harper and Lane. It was the validation I had craved for years, the recognition I had deserved. But it had come too late. For the first time in a long time, I had to ask myself a question. Was proving myself to them still worth it? The battle within. I sat by my window for hours that night, staring at the city skyline. My heart warred with my head. If I returned, I would have power, control, a seat at the table I had earned long ago. But at what cost? Could I truly trust Michael Harper to keep his word? Could I ever look at that office the same way, knowing that when push came to shove, they had chosen politics over loyalty? Then there was Crestwood, a place where I would be story fresh, a smaller firm, but one that valued relationships over corporate power plays, a place that wanted me, not just my client list. It was a leap into the unknown. But hadn't Harper and Lane already made the choice for me that the moment the seat made me go? The call that changed everything. By morning, I had made my decision. I picked up my phone and dialed. Daniel Carter answered on the second ring. Elena, he greeted. I was hoping I'd hear from you soon. I exhaled, steadying my resolve. I'll take the partnership at Crestwood, I said. There was a pause, one of quiet satisfaction. Good choice, Daniel finally said. You won't regret it. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I believed him. Harper and Lane's downfall news travels fast in the corporate world. Within days, it was everywhere. Lucas Grant had been fired. The board had finally realized the damage he had caused. Losing clients, losing me, had been the last straw. Harper and Lane was bleeding and the investors were panicking. Michael Harper was left to clean up the mess. A part of me expected to feel victorious, to revel in the downfall of the man who had dismissed me so callously, but all I felt was quiet closure. Harper and Lane had made their choice, and I had made mine. I wasn't looking back. The call from Daniel came early in the morning, interrupting my usual routine of coffee and reviewing Crestwood's latest client acquisitions. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Elena, we've been approached by a major investor, he said, wasting no time. They want us to acquire Harper and Lane. I nearly dropped my coffee. My heart pounded in my chest as the words sank in. Come again, I said, gripping my phone tighter. Daniel chuckled. I know. It's ironic, isn't it? The firm that let you go is now drowning, and we have the chance to take control. I let out a slow breath, the sheer poetry of it all overwhelming. Just weeks ago, I had walked out of Harper and Lane with nothing but a severance check and a broken sense of loyalty. Now I had the chance to sit at the very top of the empire that had cast me aside. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or simply let the moment sink in. Power moves. By the time I arrived at Crestwood's headquarters, the details were already being ironed out. The investor, an influential figure in the financial sector, had recognized the chaos at Harper and Lane and saw an opportunity. Their leadership had been fractured, their top clients had jumped ship, and their once imposing reputation was crumbling. They needed a lifeline, and we were it. As I sat in the boardroom reviewing the initial merger terms, I couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. Just weeks ago, Harper and Lane had thought they were untouchable. Now they were a weakened giant, ripe for acquisition. Crestwood had been expanding aggressively, and with Harper and Lane's remaining assets, we would solidify our position as a dominant force in the industry. The board members exchanged knowing glances, their excitement palpable. This is happening fast, I murmured as Sykes, di ba usaw ni Keys truly desperate, Daniel nodded. Wait, they are, and they know we hold all the cards. The negotiation table. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Michael Harper and the remaining executives of Harper and Lane. The conference room was eerily similar to the one where Lucas Grant had blindsided me, but now the power dynamic had shifted entirely. Michael looked weary. The sharp, confident man I had once respected now seemed weighed down by the burden of his firm's decline. Elena, he greeted, his voice measured. I assume you're leading this deal? I met his gaze without hesitation. Yes. A flicker of something crossed his face. Pride, regret, maybe even admiration. The terms were straightforward. Crestwood would take full ownership of Harper and Lane, absorbing their clients, employees, and remaining assets. The brand itself would be retired, folded under Crestwood's banner. Lucas Grant, not even considered for a position. Michael Harper offered an advisory role, symbolic at best. It was ruthless, but it was business. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. I can't say I didn't see this coming. He looked at me, something unreadable in his expression. I suppose there's no changing your mind. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Michael, you let them throw me away like I was replaceable. This isn't personal. It's about leadership, and Crestwood has it. Harper and Lane lost it the moment they let Lucas Grant take control. He exhaled slowly, nodding. Then, let's finalize the deal. The final stroke. The acquisition moved swiftly. Legal teams finalized contracts. Financial audits were conducted, and soon, the Harper and Lane name was history. When the news broke, the industry buzzed with shock and speculation. Clients who had once relied on Harper and Lane now looked to Crestwood with renewed confidence. For the employees who had remained loyal, we ensured smooth transitions, keeping as many jobs as possible. It wasn't about dismantling Harper and Lane. It was about salvaging what was worth saving. Lucas Grant predictably tried to reach out. He sent a short email, his tone restrained but unmistakably desperate. Elena, I'd like to talk. I believe we can find a way to work together. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without response. Not revenge, justice. As I walked into my new office, an expansive space overlooking the city skyline, I felt a sense of completion. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Harper and Lane had underestimated me, and now I had ensured that no one in this industry would ever make that mistake again. The takeover had been swift, but the fallout was just beginning. Not everyone was happy with how things had played out. Whispers spread through the office corridors, hushed conversations stopped when I entered the room, and more than once I caught former Harper and Lane employees giving me icy glares. "You planned this, didn't you?" The accusation came from Mark Reynolds, one senior consultant who had been at Harper and Lane for nearly as long as I had. His voice was tight with frustration, his arms crossed as he stood in front of me in the break room. The room fell into silence as others pretended not to listen, but their lingering stares betrayed their curiosity. I met his gaze evenly. "No, Mark, I didn't plan this, but I recognized my own value when they didn't." His jaw tightened, but he had no retort. He, like many others, had seen how Lucas Grant had dismantled the very foundation of Harper and Lane, replacing relationships with numbers, trust with arrogance, and, in the end, it had cost them everything. The divided office. There were two camps in the office now, those who saw me as a symbol of hope and growth, and those who saw me as the executioner of their old world. Some former Harper and Lane employees were relieved, even grateful. They had been suffocating under Lucas Grant's leadership, watching as client after client slipped away. Now, with Crestwood taking over, stability had returned, and so had the respect for relationships that Harper and Lane had once been known for. But there were others. Those who had been fiercely loyal to the old firm even as it crumbled. To them, I wasn't a savior. I was the woman who had walked away, only to return as the one holding all the power. I understood their bitterness, but I wouldn't apologize for my success. The clients speak. While the internal tension simmered, the external response was overwhelmingly clear. Crestwood was thriving. Sophia Bennett was the first to make her stance known. She signed a long-term long-term contract within days of the acquisition, locking in Bennett Tech's loyalty to Crestwood. "Elena, this was the best decision I could have made," she told me over lunch at one of the city's top restaurants. Harper and Lane lost sight of what mattered. "I trust you to make sure Crestwood never does." Other clients followed suit. Archer Pharmaceuticals, Summit Financial, and a dozen more signed extended contracts, solidifying Crestwood's reputation as the firm that valued relationships over bottom-line greed. Lucas Grant's name was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when leadership lost sight of the people who built the company. Confrontations and closure. One evening, as I was gathering my things to leave the office, I heard footsteps approaching. "Elena!" I turned to see Michael Harper standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, less defeated than before, but still burdened. I wanted to say, "You were right." I studied him, waiting. I let Lucas take over because I thought he could bring something new to the table. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I should have fought for the firm's soul. His gaze met mine, regret evident in his eyes. "I failed you." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words settle. "I needed to hear that," I admitted, but did do this to destroy Harper and Lane. I did it to protect what mattered." He nodded slowly. I know, and despite everything, I'm glad it was you who took over. And it wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And for the first time since this all began, I felt a sense of peace. The real victory. As I walked out of the office that night, the city skyline stretched before me, lights twinkling like 1,000 possibilities. This wasn't about revenge. It had never been. It was about proving to myself, to my former colleagues, to the industry that I had never been just another employee. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I had finally found where I truly belonged. 6 months had passed, yet it felt like a lifetime ago when I had walked out of Harper Lane with my dignity in shambles and my career seemingly over. Now, as I stood in my office at Crestwood Harper Consulting, I took in the transformation that had unfolded before my eyes. The firm was thriving. More than thriving, actually. We had built something extraordinary. The new client relations department was the heart of it all. It wasn't just about numbers or contracts, it was about people. I had personally overseen every hire, ensuring that each person understood the importance of genuine relationships. Trust. Commitment. These weren't just words here, they were the foundation upon which we rebuilt. Harper Lane had once been synonymous with prestige, but it had lost its soul. Crestwood Harper had become something else entirely. Something stronger, something unshakable. A farewell and a new beginning. Michael Harper's retirement had been inevitable. After the takeover, he had stayed in an advisory role, helping smooth the transition. But as time passed, it became clear that his heart was no longer in it. The day he announced his departure, he came to my office. "You did it, Elena," he said, standing by the window, gazing out at the city skyline. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "You made something better than what Harper Lane ever was." I didn't respond immediately. There was nothing left to say. We both knew the past couldn't be undone. The betrayal, the mistakes, they had led us here, and in a way I was grateful for them. Without them, I wouldn't have found my true worth. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. "I hope you'll take care of it better than I did." I met his gaze. "I will." And I meant it. The power of reputation. Crestwood Harper's success wasn't just about the acquisition, it was about the reputation we had cultivated. Clients who had once been wary of the transition now spoke about us with admiration. Sophia Bennett called me one afternoon, her voice filled with approval. "Elena, I had no doubts about you, but you've exceeded even my expectations," she said. "You didn't just take over a firm, you rebuilt trust. That's rare in this industry." I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small smile. "It's not about strategy, Sophia. It's about people." And that was the truth. Crestwood Harper wasn't about the old world of corporate power struggles. It was about something more lasting. Integrity. Looking back. Moving forward. I often found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. There were still moments where I remembered the pain of being escorted out of Harper Lane, of packing up my desk with shaking hands. But those memories no longer held power over me. Instead, I looked at where I stood now. A leader, a partner, a woman who had not only survived, but thrived. As I walked through the office that day past the vibrant, bustling teams who were shaping the future of Crestwood Harper, I felt a deep sense of peace. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The view from my office at Crestwood Harper Consulting stretched across the city skyline, a testament to everything I had built. Not just the firm, but the reputation, the trust, the relationships that mattered more than any corporate title ever could. I ran my fingers along the edge of my desk, feeling the cool, polished surface beneath my touch. So much had changed, and yet, at my core, I was still the same woman who had walked into Harper Lane 2 decades ago, hungry to prove herself, determined to make a difference. Only now. I no longer sought validation from others. I no longer needed it. More than just a name. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Daniel Carter, The headhunter, who had seen my worth when I'd nearly lost sight of it myself, he leaned against the doorway, a smirk playing on his lips. "You do realize you've become the name people whisper about in the industry, right?" he said, stepping inside. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Is that so?" He nodded, dropping into the chair across from me. "Harper and Lane used to be the standard. Now it's Crestwood Harper. You've set a new precedent for what leadership should look like. People trust you, Elena. That's something money can't buy." I folded my hands on my desk, letting his words settle. He was right. Trust was the real currency in this business, and I had earned it the hard way. Lucas Grant was wrong. My thoughts drifted to Lucas Grant, the man who had dismissed me with cold indifference, who had assumed my value ended the moment I walked out of Harper and Lane's doors. He had been wrong, so devastatingly wrong. He had believed that business was just numbers on a spreadsheet, that relationships could be discarded like expired contracts. But business was always personal. People didn't stay loyal to logos. They stayed loyal to trust, to consistency, to integrity. And that was why Crestwood Harper flourished while Harper and Lane crumbled. Lucas had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. The future I built. The sound of laughter and conversation filtered in from the hallway, outside my office, my team, the people who had believed in me, who had followed me into this new chapter without hesitation. I rose from my chair and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing down at the city below. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. Harper and Lane had once defined my career, but Crestwood Harper was my legacy. Not because of its profit margins or prestige, but because of the people who stood with me. The clients who had trusted me. The colleagues who had chosen integrity over ambition. The final chapter. As I turned back to my desk, my phone buzzed. A text from Sophia Bennett flashed across the screen. "Still the best decision I ever made, following you. Let's celebrate soon." I smiled. Yes, business was personal, and in the end, I had won, not because I sought revenge, but because I never forgot the one thing that truly mattered: people.